Elias Hart rode home with the night blowing cold across the flats and the smell of juniper riding the wind. The low boards of his ranch house showed lantern light through the chinks, a ribbon of gold under the big dark sky. He had been in too. Cinder bend for salt and nails, and to ask after hay. And though folks called him a man who kept to himself, there had been hands on his shoulders when he left, and who still remembered when he used to laugh. He had been a boy who could run a horse. Hard and stand on a river rock with his arms out like wings. Then the border war took his brother. Then fever took the woman he'd been planning to marry, and quiet moved into him the way cold moves into an empty house. He learned to listen more than he spoke. He learned to mend fence with patience. He learned to sleep on one side of the bed and not look at the other. The ranch had eaten up those years without complaint. Hart's Reach sat under a long red bluff, with cottonwoods running the line of the Red Willow River like women at a quilting frame. A porch wrapped the house. Hester Kettlehays, to anyone with sense, kept the kitchen and kept Elias honest. His hands were a mix of boys who came to be men, and men who had seen too much and found they could still make a straight row when asked. It was a place that ran on small kindnesses and the kind of hard work that makes a body sleep. The new hand had come at the start of spring rain. Elias had been coming out of the feed store when he saw the boy on the steps, hat in hands, boots too thin for the mud. He looked maybe 18, with a jaw that had learned to set and eyes too old for the face they were in. He wore his hair, long enough to hide his ears, but short enough to pass, and he kept one hand close to his chest like something there had been hurt once and not mended right. "You got room for one more?" the boy asked without fuss. "I can ride and mend. I don't spook easy. What's your name?" Elias asked. "Kit," the boy said. He hooked a thumb at a canvas roll. "No kin, no trouble to bring," Elias considered. Men are good and not good, but quiet often means something hard has already happened. He liked the way the boy stood feet planted, like he knew the ground could give, and he'd ride it if it did. "All right," Elias said. "You come up to Hart's Reach. You get dry. You get a bed and a plate every night you earn it." Kit tipped his hat and breathed as if he'd been holding his breath since winter. "Yes, sir." The road home was a washboard of ruts, and the rain started like it had been waiting for him to get out from under a roof. Kit rode with his shoulders squared and didn't complain. He twisted in the saddle when the river came into view and took in the line of cottonwoods with a look that could have been hope. If you were watching for it, Hayes met them at the porch. With a towel and a look over Kit that could sharpen a knife and soften a heart. "Both, you like stew?" she asked the boy. "That's what there is? You like talking? Then you'll have to learn to do it without words, 'cause I'm saving mine." "Yes, ma'am," Kit said, smiling quick. Hayes grunted. "We'll get along." The bunkhouse was warm, and one bed had clean sheets. Benny, who had 3 missing teeth and the kindest hands on earth for colts, nodded at Kit. Abe was old as dust and twice as patient, offered a hand. Clay's eyes cut sharp, measuring. Jocks, 17, stared because that's what boys do when they see someone the color of their own future and try to guess if it fits. Kit rolled his bed, tucked his small things under the frame, and went out. With the rest at dawn, he knew his way around a horse. He put his weight right on a post when pulling wire. He did not overtalk. He smiled sometimes, small, when a calf took its first awkward drink. If he flinched when a man swore too loud or a rope whistled past his ear, nobody made him say why Elias watched without making it obvious. He liked men who learned the wind before they lifted their hats to it. He liked that Kit did not push to be first or last, content to fall into place like a bead in a string. On the 3rd day, they drove the herd to water, dust rising in a red fog. He'd sat on the land. Men and cattle thought about shade. The red willow ran brown and quick. Elias told his crew to water and rest the herd on the east bank where the cottonwoods made the air kind. "Keep your boots on when you wade," he said, and smiled a little, snappers like toes. They laughed, even Clay. Water brings a man back to himself. The river threw up the old smell of rain on rock. Men sloshed in, whales in too shallow sea. Shirts came off. The day got younger by 2 hours just from that sound, Kit hung back, went downriver, away from the noise. Elias saw him leave and let him. Some people need a stretch of water with no eyes on it before they can let the cold take the heat out of their bones. After a while, Elias walked that way, thinking he might sit on a rock and let the river remind him he was small and the sky was big. The cottonwoods creaked. Dragonflies stitched light with their wings. He heard a yelp and a splash, then laughing. He picked up his pace without thinking. Kit was in the water up to his ribs. Hair shoved back, face lit, not watching the bank. He dunked his head, came up, wiped his eyes, and turned toward the sharp rock that jutted where the river hooked. Didn't see Elias yet. The boy's shirt was thrown over a branch, trousers hitched Trevor clean and sky around him. Elias came around the cottonwood and saw what he saw. The words flew out of him, a stupid, shocked thing from an old hurt world. "Where's your thing, boy?" It wasn't a lewd question. It wasn't clever. It was a rancher's rough mouth stumbling over a surprise. In the same breath, he heard himself and felt the knife of regret. He turned his face away hard and put a hand up like a blind man learning a room. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry." Kit had gone still as a stone midstream.
"Ow," the river whispered around his legs.
Then the boy turned and waded to the bank without splashing, as if he were afraid to make noise. Elias shrugged out of his coat without looking, kept his eyes on the bark of the cottonwood like it had become the only thing in the world he held. The coat out behind him, the way a man holds out a plate for a frightened cat. "Here," he said. "Take it." Kit took it quick. The wool swallowed him. He clutched it at the throat with one hand. The other hand slipped to his side, the way a person's hand goes to an old pain without asking. He stood there with river running off him, breath high and fast. "I shouldn't have said that," Elias said. He kept his voice low. "It was wrong. I didn't." "Forget me," Kit laughed. It was a sound made of nerves and thrill and history and shame. "It ain't the first time a man tried to make a joke out of seeing me," he said. His voice had a threat in it Elias had not noticed before. Not a boy's voice, a woman's. Voice taught to hide in her own throat. Elias let himself breathe and made himself look at the sky once so his eyes had something wide in them, before he turned his face back to Kit. He didn't look where he shouldn't. He kept his eyes on Kit's face, on the line of a jaw that had more courage in it than ought to be required of anyone. "Are you hurt?" he asked, soft. "Has someone hurt you?" Kit shook his head and then nodded, and then shook it again, because truth is not simple. "I'm fine," he said, which meant the opposite. "I can work. I'll leave if you want me to. I should have stayed out of sight." "You're not leaving," Elias said. "You hear me?" He put a hand on the cottonwood so he wouldn't step closer and make a wrong thing worse. "This is your place as much as any man's who can work and eat and tell me when offense is down. What I saw, what I said is mine to be ashamed of, not yours." Kit's mouth trembled. He hauled air in through his nose like a man in a fight. "My name isn't Kit," he said, so low Elias had to lean to hear. "It's Catherine. Kate, I cut my hair with a penknife behind a barn, and I took my brother's hat, and I walked until the road had my feet memorized. I've kept my head down and my shoulders square, and I chose yes or no when it came at me. With a knife in it, I can't go back." Elias felt the ache of it like his own. He made himself keep his hands where they were. "You won't," he said. "Not unless you want to. I won't send you anywhere. Do you want to keep being Kit here? Or do you want to be Catherine and damn the rest?" Kate swallowed. Her eyes flicked to the river, then to his face again. "If you can take the trouble," she said, "I'll answer to the name I'm called kindest." Elias nodded. "Kit, then," he said. It felt like a vow.
"Ow!"
He cleared his throat. "The hands don't need to know beyond what you allow. Hayes will. She's not a woman you lie effectively to. Me and her and you, that's enough to keep a house honest." A leaf dropped from the cottonwood and landed on his boot. He didn't brush it off. "We'll talk when you're dressed," he said. "No hurry. I'm going to walk to the bend and count dragonflies until this heat stops feeling like it's my fault." Kit made a sound, a laugh that was almost a sob and almost a thank you. Elias, he froze. It had been months since someone said his name soft like that, The way you say it when you mean the man, not the boss or the ranch. Yeah, thank you, Kit said. He tipped his hat and went downriver. At the bend, he sat on a rock and put his elbows on his knees. He looked at the sky until the blackbirds stacked themselves back into trees and the river's speech turned into something he could carry. The words he had thrown like a rock came back as a prayer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let me make it right. Hayes listened with her arms folded and her mouth doing things only old women's mouths can do. Taking the measure of a story while keeping everything else in place, Kit sat at the table in a clean shirt, her hair combed back, the coat folded. Over the chair, she hadn't looked Elias in the eye since the river. She had looked at his hands once, and away. And he couldn't manage to set them anywhere that didn't feel loud. You keep a good secret. Hayes said to Kit when the telling was done, and you kept yourself alive. That's memorable in my book. Kit's shoulders dropped a fraction. I'll work double, she said. I won't make trouble. You'll eat double, Hayes returned. You're 5 meals behind. Elias stood in the doorway and let the room have a woman's air in it for a minute. Then he sat. Who are you running from? He asked, plain. If it's nothing but hunger, we can handle that. If it's someone who thinks he owns you, I'll need to know his name. Ward Lamont, Kit said, and the name hit the floor. Like a coin no one wants to pick up. Elias took in a slow breath and let it out the same way. He's got his hand in every pocket from here to the Yellow Hills, he said, flat. Timber, freight, judges, whispers in corners. I've known men bought dinner with his money and didn't ask who paid. He's not the kind who forgets. A yes or a no. My father owed him, Kit said. A loan for the mill. Money to get us through a winter that bit too hard. My father died in spring with sawdust on his hands. Mr. Lamont came with paper and smile and said I was payment. Said he'd marry me and make the debt lawful. I said I'd rather lay down on the railroad and let the 9 o'clock do the choosing. He said that could be arranged. I left that night. Hayes leaned forward. You got papers? Kit reached under the table to the inside hem of her shirt and drew out a small oilskin packet from a pocket she'd sewn there. She set it on the wood. A letter from Reverend Albright saying my father's intention was to pay with money, not daughters, she said. Another letter from Mr. Lamont, written to his foreman, calling me property. Oh. I took it because the foreman left it on the desk while he went to the yard. I know writing isn't the same as truth. But I thought it might be truth enough. Elias didn't touch the papers. He looked at Kit's face, and the way she kept that small, brave line to her mouth. He looked at her hands. The knuckles were raw. The nails were chewed short. She had not cried while she spoke. He did not think she had cried much since she started running. You'll stay, he said. My answer can be that, just like it was by the river. You'll work. You'll sleep. You'll be called by the name you choose, and the rest will take care of itself except the part that doesn't. I'll see to that part. You can't fight a man like Lamont, Hayes warned, without any panic in it. Not with fists. Not fair. Elias nodded. I have no illusions about fairness, he said, but he can't buy everything at once. Or he can't buy, will borrow Sheriff Calloway's patience, the marshal's time, a preacher's aversion to messes. We'll put her in the sunlight and see what rats run. Kit's mouth quirked. Putting me in sunlight might be the first kind thing anyone has said to me in a while, she murmured. With more courage in it than the sentence's smallness deserved, Hayes clapped once, sharp. We will tell the boys a story they can carry. She said they don't need all of it. They need to know you have my protection and Elias's. That'll do. Elias and Hayes stood shoulder to shoulder that night and told the crew. Benny nodded like a man happy to accept any reason to treat a stranger as a friend. Jox's mouth fell open, and then he shut it with his hand, like he was guarding a treasure. Abe said, I see, in a way that meant he saw more than anyone had said. Clay looked at Kit with a stare that was a test, and a dare, and a question. All at once, not your business, Elias said to the room, particularly to Clay without saying his name. Clay tipped his hat and half smiled. Nothing's ever my business, he said. I just do the parts I'm told. Do the parts I tell you, then, Elias said. He held Clay's gaze until the other man dropped his eyes. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes it isn't. The Days lay themselves out. Kit kept his hurt cap low and her mouth tighter. Out on the range, no one looked twice. From a distance, men are only hats in motion. Up close, the small things tell. The way Kit's hands were gentler with a skittish Mustang than any man's had been all spring. The way she stood in doorways, never with her back exposed. The way she counted knives in a room with her eyes and made sure she had one more. Elias found himself measuring his breathing against hers without meaning to. He found himself when he woke in the night, listening to the house's timbers and checking blessedly that there was no foot on the porch. That wasn't his. He found himself wanting to hand her a scarf on the mornings the wind cut harder and wanting to take the empty cup from her hand just for the permission of the touch. The first test came in town. Part 3. Cinder Bend and a paper on a post. They went to Cinder Bend on a Saturday for flour and mail and the feeling of being inside the noise of other people for an hour so the quiet back home would be sweeter. Hayes and Benny rode. 201 went alone anymore. The Red Willow made a patient sound under the bridge. The general store bell was a sound like a small memory. There was a new paper tacked to the post out front. Men stood around it and read it again the way they do when they can't believe what they're seeing. The paper read like Church wrote the words and the bank lent them out. Ward Lamont offered a reward for a runaway named Catherine Bell. It called her ungrateful. It called her property. It called whoever harbored her a thief. Hayes read without, moving her mouth. Elias read with his jaw tight. Kit stood at the corner of the porch, half in shadow. Kept her eyes on the horizon so she wouldn't have to see her name in a stranger's hand. Shame, someone said. It's a good man, by all accounts. By whose accounts? Asked the blacksmith, who had a habit of hitting truth the way he hit iron, by the ones he pays, said the telegraph operator, a woman with hair pinned in a bun tight enough to hold secrets. She looked at Elias and then at Kit, as if deciding. If this was the day she'd pick a fight with a giant. She tipped her head a fraction. "Mr. Hart," she said, "I got mail for you. Came with a note from the marshal's office. You can read it here, or by your own fire." He took it. A thin sheet with the marshal's stamp. Plain message. Word of Lamont's posting received. Laramie's court is ready to hear charges if you can bring the girl and her proof. No, not. Trust a deputy without a federal star. They've tried that trick twice this month. Come by the long road, not the quick one. Men are watching the quick one. Elias folded the paper so the stamp showed to anyone who asked for it and tucked it into his vest. He put his hand on the small of Kit's back, not a touch a man should have the right to take. But one he asked in the gentle press of his palm. She moved half a step closer. She was shaking. You couldn't see it if you were 8 feet away. You could, if you were him. Hayes plucked the reward posting off the post with a thumb and cut it in half with a knife she wasn't supposed to be carrying. Litter, she said, and put both pieces in the trash. Lamont won't like that. Clay drawled from the shadow of the livery. He had been there, and no one had seen him walk up. It happened with men sometimes. To watch for it. If you wanted to get old, Lamont can come pick through my trash if he wants to get his cuffs dirty. Hayes said. Clay smiled. It looked like an animal showing teeth. Careful, he said. Some friends of his are more willing to get their hands messy. Elias stepped between Clay and Kit lazily, like he had all the time in the world and wanted to spend it standing. Exactly there. It's something to say it now, he said. Words you have to put a hat over to keep them from flying. Save them for your pillow. Clay's eyes cut to Kit. A small, ugly logic sat there. I'm just thinking about how often the sky brings us what we deserve. The sky brings what it brings, Elias said, steady. Men decide what to do with it. Clay tipped his hat. You're a poet now. Only when I have to speak slow so someone doesn't mishear me, Elias said. Benny's hand went to his belt, Hayes's to her pocket. The blacksmith came up. From behind with a hammer on his shoulder, Clay lifted both hands and backed up 3 small steps, smiling wider. All right, he said. All right. I was only making conversation. Then change your subject, Hayes snapped. They went home the long way, over Stoneback Hill and through the draw where the willow trees make a tunnel. You could marry under if you weren't the type to stand up in front of folks and say vows. Elias rode with his face quiet. Kit rode with her jaw set, sometimes pressing her mouth against her scarf like she needed to hide her breath. When the house came into view, Kit let out a sound. Gah! It scared Elias so much he thought he'd missed. Seeing a fire? Then he saw the porch. Hester had put 2 old chairs side by side out there for the first time in a long time. She had put a blanket over the arms of the one on the left. It was a pattern Elias's mother had sewn and his father had mended. The same kind of cloth as the one he had wrapped around his dead brother after the war, hugging grief into corners where it wouldn't blow the roof off. Sit, Hayes commanded, when they pulled up and stomped the dust off their boots. You look like men riding through sadness, and there's stew to meet you, which ought to be met with joy. So rest your faces. They ate. The stew was rich. The bread was thick, and the butter had salt enough to taste. After, Kit helped Hayes wipe the table. Elias took a knife and whittled a stick down for the sheer animal satisfaction of making a thing into a different thing with his hands. You want to take the long road to Laramie? Hayes said into the quiet, as if the decision were already made. And she wanted to scold it before it could speak. You want to go at first light? You want to take Benny and Jocks because Benny will keep the air sweet and Jocks will learn? You want to leave me with Clay and Abe, and you think I'm going to? I'll let you do that without telling you, I know. Elias smiled. Hayes was a storm and a roof both. I know you know, he said. I want to ask you to forgive me anyway. Hayes snorted. I always did like you best when you're foolish on the side of good, she said. Take my good knife. The little one. The one that looks like it couldn't do more than peel an apple and can do more than a man's weight in a fight. Kit looked down at her hands. Thank you, she said. She was staring at the dark wood of the table like she might fall into it. If something happens, nothing is going to happen, Hayes said. If it does, we'll send for you. Or you'll send for us. And if neither happens, then we will know the silence is because you're making new noise somewhere and I will be mad and joyful at the same time. That is what loving you is going to be like. I can tell already. Kit looked up. A laugh snuck into her mouth and kept going until her eyes were bright. Yes, ma'am, she said. I can take that kind of love. Part 4. The long road they left before the light got its name for the day. The red willow looked the color of iron and moved like a heavy animal trying to get comfortable. The air smelled like lightning. Elias wore the marshal's letter inside. His vest, where a bullet would have to make a decision about God before it got through. Kit wore the oilskin packet tied flat to the bone of her spine. Benny sang low because he always did when he was nervous. Jocks kept his eyes big and his mouth shut. He was going to be a man people trusted, and he wanted to start early. They crossed Dry Fork, which was not, and the horses sank to their knees and pushed through with that careful power that makes you. Remember, there's no better thing than a good horse under you. They cut between 2 hills that had never gotten around to being mountains. A hawk lifted, carrying a snake. Elias did not allow himself to read omens into it. By noon, the land opened. The sky got proud. The wind dropped. Everything paused to see what would happen. They stopped at a cottonwood. To water the horses and eat hard cheese cut with a knife that had kissed an apple last night in Hayes's kitchen, Jock squinted and shaded his eyes. Riders, he said, Elias. Stood, Benny swallowed and took an easier breath. Kit didn't move. She was a statue except for her eyes. 3 men. 2 rode like they were good at it. One rode like his mother had put him on a horse for the first time last week and told him to keep his head up. The 2 good riders wore their guns low. The bad one wore his badge high. Afternoon. The deputy who'd gotten himself involved at the ranch said, lifting a hand, Mr. Hart, Deputy Elias returned. You weren't invited? The deputy looked like he'd rather have mud in his Sunday stew than be here. Mr. Lamont says you abducted a woman. Benny made a noise that could have been a laugh. It could have been a cough. Jocks looked at his saddle horn like it was a new kind of math. Kit's hand slid into her jacket pocket, finding the handle of Hayes's small knife. She's a free person, Elias said, and she's going to Laramie with a marshal's letter to prove it. The deputy looked at the 2 men beside him as if hoping truth was catching. One had eyes like pewter. The other had a smile like a string pulled too tight. The smiley one spoke. Paper's a nice fancy, he said. Guns answer quicker. You're off your beat, Elias said quietly. This is county line. You a sheriff of 2 counties now? Is this ground right here? The smiley man said, looking down at his horse's shadow. This ground belongs to Lamont. He flicked his eyes up. Everything belongs to Lamont. Went for his gun with that ugly speed men have who burn to use it. Elias had his out and pointed at dirt before the other man could clear leather. No, Elias said. 1 word. All the days in it. Kit stepped from behind the tree, then Brown. Hat pulled down, scarf high. You want to shoot me? She asked, her voice steady, because she had decided something and didn't have to decide it again. Don't miss. If you miss, I will go to Laramie, and I will read your name in a room where even men like you have to stand up when they are. Told the pewter-eyed man changed his mind. Could see it from his saddle to his hand. He lifted his palm empty, like he was surrendering to morning itself. I ain't dying for Lamont's games, he said, and turned his horse half a pace. The smiley one snarled. Cowards, he spit. He lifted his gun toward Kit. Jocks moved before thought. He could tell he wouldn't be 17 forever. Took a step, a big, stupid, beautiful step, and shoved Kit sideways. The shot ripped bark from the cottonwood. Splinters flew. Elias fired once, not to kill, but to make the world stop. He hit the ground near the smiley one's boot, and the horse danced and reared, and the man grabbed for saddle and lost the moment and lost his appetite for a second bullet. The deputy gulped air like a drowning man and shouted, Stop it! Stop it! I don't have a piece of paper that says this, and I won't write one with my gun. Everything went still again. Then the pewter-eyed man said, Lo, you don't want the marshal to know you killed somebody on his road. Marshal's got his own roads, the smiley one muttered. But he let his gun slide down and back into the holster like a snake going into a crack in the wall. We'll be going, Elias said, and you'll be going. Follow God into the part of your heart you've been hiding from, and you won't like what you find. No one breathed for a count of 6. Then the pewter-eyed one tipped his hat in a way that looked more like I'm alive than good day. And they turned their horses and rode south. Kit let out her breath so quietly only the cottonwood heard it. Jock stared at the hole in the bark as if he had written his name there. Benny squeezed his shoulder once and then started singing again under his breath. It was a song about water. They made Laramie at dusk. The marshal was waiting with a woman who had hair in a bun and hands that made strangers sit and feel like they were cousins. They went into a room with a table that had burn marks on it and a coffee stain in the shape of Texas. The judge wasn't. There, they went the next morning to a room with a bench and a seal and a floor that had seen a lot of boots and heavy hearts. Kit stood. She put her hand on a book and said her name in a voice that was clear as the sky after lightning peels open. The day she told the truth. She didn't tell all of it, because some truths are yours to keep right under your skin. She told enough. Elias watched the judge watch her and knew they'd reached the edge of something. Then the door opened behind them, and Ward Lamont walked in. Part 5. A man who thinks he owns the door. Ward Lamont was shorter than his money. Suit had a crease that could cut bread. His hair had never heard of wind. He didn't look at the world like it could surprise him. He looked at it like a dog that had learned to come when he whistled. Your Honor, he said without bowing, I am here to correct a misunderstanding. This child is my ward. I have fed and clothed her. I have papers. You have the wrong room, the judge said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man who had not eaten yet and didn't intend. To start with lies, you have had a lot of wrong rooms and right papers. Not today. Lamont's eyes flicked over the benches until they landed on Kit. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her shoes. Clara, he said, it's time to come home. My name is Catherine, she said. It always was, whether you wrote it or not, he smiled. It was a tight thing. He took a letter out of his coat, held it up between 2 fingers like a trick, and then turned fast, drawing a small pistol from his pocket and pointing it straight at Kit's chest. Gasps came up like birds. Elias moved like a tree falling in a strong wind. He stepped in front of Kit and set his back to her and faced the gun. His hand went to his belt and stopped. The marshal's hand went to his own gun. He had counted, and there was no safe bullet in the room, not with the judge behind and Kit behind and Lamont in front and the angle wrong. Don't, Elias said. He had never used that voice on a man with a gun. He'd use it on cattle about to bolt, and on storms he needed 5 minutes grace from. He had used it on his own body on nights when grief tried to walk off with his pulse. This time it listened. Lamont's hand shook. It surprised him to have something close betray him. "You think you can stop the tide?" he asked Elias. "You think you can stand there and be a dam between me and what's mine?" Elias did not look away. "People what and who are not?" "Things," he said, and his country grammar was the best grammar there, and tides never last. You know that. That's why you keep running your mouth. Afraid quiet would show you yourself. He turned his head half an inch and spoke to Kit. Without losing Lamont from the corner of his eye, "I'm sorry for the river." Kit made a small sound. It would have sounded like forgiveness closing its hands around a stupid thing and breaking it like a twig. "I love you," Elias said, and the words did the same thing to him. As the river had done washed him clean and made him cold and awake, that's not an oath. It's the simplest thing I got. If he puts a hole in me, you pick up the truth and you run with it like you were born to run. You hear me? You don't stop? Lamont's eyes went small. "A rancher in love with his hand," he said, as if that were dirtier than what he himself had done. "They'll write little songs about you." "Maybe," Elias said. "Or maybe they will keep it as a quiet thing good people tell their children when they teach them to be brave." Lamont's hand twitched. The marshal moved. Men in the room bent. The judge spoke 2 words. "Now marshal," and the marshal fired, not at Lamont's chest or head, but at the hand holding the gun. The pistol jumped. Lamont screamed. The bullet went into the floor 2 feet to the right of Elias's boot. People screamed because fear does that even when the danger is already red and on the ground. The marshal was on Lamont in a second, knee on wrist, the gun flat in the corner. "You're done," he said, like a sentence. Lamont hissed and thrashed, and made promises of hell. The judge stood and banged the gavel down once, hard. "You have made your bed of papers and threats," he said. "Cool, lie in it." He looked at Kit. She was standing very straight. She had one hand on Elias's back. Her face was a color men in paintings don't get right. "Are you hurt?" the judge asked. "No," she said. She took in a breath and let it out. "No, sir," the judge nodded. "Go on then," he said. "Finish making yourself free." She put her hand on the book again, not because the law needed another oath, but because she did. She finished. When she walked out of the court under the open, ridiculous, beautiful sky, her steps were even. She did not run. Running had gotten her here. Walking would take her home. Part 6. The wedding that wasn't, then, was they planned to marry quiet. On the porch with Hayes as witness and Benny sputtering happy and Jocks trying to look like he wasn't going to cry. Elias built a frame with cottonwood branches and Hayes tied on white cloth that had been curtains once in a house where women had laughed. It still smelled like lemon soap if you put your nose right in it and breathed. They meant to marry on a Sunday. After stew and before the wind changed, Clay came the night before. He rode up, making too much noise. He swung down, swagger, smile. He knocked without waiting. "Evening," he said. Brought a wedding present. Hayes put her hand on her hip. "Not wanting it," she said. Clay's smile tilted. "Lamont's men are 5 miles out," he said. "They're going to come at dawn." Elias leaned in the doorframe. "How kind," he said. Clay looked at Kit. The ugly logic was tempered by something that looked almost like respect. "You should run," he said to her. "He'll make a mess of you, just to show he can. He's proud." "Proud men are stupid." "When they get embarrassed?" "I ran once," she said. "I don't know how again." Clay tipped his hat back and looked up at the roof like God was up there whittling his name. "I could say I'm doing this for a woman I had once," he said. "I could say I'm doing this because Lamont forgot to pay me last week and I'm cheap and fair. Or I could say it's none of your business why. At least it'll be for something that looks like something when you stand it up in sunlight." Elias studied him. "Which is it?" "All of them," Clay said, and laughed. "It wasn't nice, but it was human." "You could have told them how to come at us quiet," Hayes said. "You didn't." Clay shrugged. "A man gets tired of swallowing bad." Hayes nodded like she would to a boy who had just confessed he'd stolen butter one time and paid for it every time he looked at a loaf. "Sit," she said. You'll do a better job of saving your skin with a biscuit in your gut. Slept in their clothes. The house knew this kind of night. It kept its boards from groaning. Stars made a cold noise that only the insides of men can hear. As dawn thinned the dark from black to blue, to a color without a name yet, shapes moved. On the ridge. 6. No 8. Men who thought they knew how to take a house, but had forgotten it was not a building they were coming for. But the people inside it, Elias stood on the porch with a shotgun held not as a dare, but as a question. Clay stood at the corner in the shadows. Benny and Jocks were on the side of the house with buckets, ready because sometimes a fight starts with fire before it starts with bullets. Hayes had her little knife and a rolling pin, and a prayer she said without letting her lips move. Morning, Mr. Hart called a man who hadn't come to Laramie, wore Lamont's suit without fitting it. Got something that belongs to us. Elias rested the barrel of the shotgun on his shoulder, like a farmer resting a hoe. What I have belongs to itself, he said. That girl is a person, Hayes said, voice like iron under cloth. Say the word property, and I'll carve it out of you letter by letter. The men laughed. It wasn't brave laughter. The man in front gestured. 2 men went to the side of the house low. Clay stepped out and put a bullet in the dirt an inch from the first one's boot. No, he said, not today. The man turned, rage up and white. His gun came up and Clay took a bullet in the arm. He grunted and said, huh, as if someone had given him a sour apple, into humility. Then it went fast. Men moved and men shouted, and men thought better of things. Elias fired once into the air. Kit stepped onto the porch with Hayes's knife and stood shoulder to shoulder with Elias. He felt her there like a second spine. The 2 men by the corner ducked and ran. The ones in the back hesitated because their guns didn't make courage either. The marshal's man, telegraph operator, had sent for him before she brewed her morning coffee, came over the rise at a gallop with 2 farmers who had decided they were tired too. The men on the ridge wavered. Go home, Elias said, clear, so the morning could hear. Go home with your blood and your shame and try to put them in different rooms. They did, in 2s and 1s, like boys coming out of a bad dare. Man in front snarled and kept his feet planted. Lamont is done, said a voice behind them, the deputy. The kid had come because he owed. He had the sense to come on foot. He lifted his hand. He's got himself to look after. Something in the man's shoulders loosened. He spat. Your people, he said. You act like the world doesn't make simple sense. It doesn't, Hayes said briskly. It makes difficult sense. And some days it makes none, and we have to carry it anyway. Go on, your breakfast is getting cold. Ah! They went. Hayes put her hand on Clay's arm, and then in it, hard, and squeezed until he said, oh, and grinned, wild with pain and triumph. Sit, she ordered. Let me stitch what you tried to throw away. Clay sat. He bled on the step. He watched Elias turn and look at Kit as if he were seeing the shape of his own life. You all right, Elias? asked Kit, nodded. She was smiling and crying and didn't bother to make either smaller. Marry me now, she said. Before somebody else decides they need to give an opinion. Elias laughed and then didn't. All right, he said. Now, the marshal's man shook his head and smiled and said, I can't marry you, but I can fetch the preacher, and the telegraph operator who had come with him, and whose bun had not moved even at a gallop. Said you don't need a preacher if you got a sky and 2 people who mean it. And Hayes said, I've got a Bible with biscuits stuck to a page from last winter. And Benny said, I'll sing if no one stops me. And Jock said nothing because he was crying already. And Clay said, make it quick. And someone, hold my other hand so I don't swear during the holy part. They stood on the porch under the old cottonwood that had learned the names of all the winds. Elias took Kit's hands. He knew the feel of them now, callous in grace. He said, I will be your roof. And she said, I will be your river. And Hayes said, that'll do. When they looked to her, because she was the only judge they needed, the wind moved in the cottonwoods as if to say, Amen, Part 7. After. The storm life did not turn easy. It turned honest. People who had looked away too long learned to look where they had not. Clay mended one arm slower than the other and worked with his mouth for a while, telling stories that were full of violence and mercy, and the number of biscuits Hayes had let him have when he was 9. He started them with "Once upon a time" because he liked making things sound better than they were and then bringing them back down where people could touch them. Jax grew into his name and his hat and his hands and stopped looking at his saddlehorn like he could find the future written there. Benny sang louder and added verses. Abe died in his sleep one night the way good men sometimes do when they have done enough and can finally lie down. The town took off its hat and held it over its heart for him. You could hear the river that day as if it had come right through the wheat. Kit wore her hair long again sometimes, braids that Hayes plaited so tight her scalp ached in a way that felt like being held. Other days she wore her hat and her scarf and answered to her chosen name quick as a whistle. Children didn't care. One way or the other, they called her Miss Kit because they liked the way it sounded and they liked the way her hands could find a splinter before it worked itself in too deep. Elias learned how to laugh again without feeling like he had betrayed something. He learned that love was not a promise to keep hurt away. It was a promise to stay when the hurt came and bring water and a clean cloth, and a story that made sense of things when the sense went thin. They returned to the Red Willow from time to so. Time, not because they needed to, because it was the right thing to do, to be in the place where a stupid, rough sentence had broken open a road toward a life. Elias would sit on the rock where he had counted dragonflies and Kit would wade with her hem in her hands and splash his boots on purpose. "You're forgiven." "You know," she said to him once, not looking up, "because you do not look a person." "In the eye when you're making a quiet thing safe." "I know," he said. "I save the memory anyway. Keeps me honest." She came back to the bank and put a hand on his cheek and turned his face toward the light through the leaves. "You're good," she said. "Not like a hymn. Like a man who learned a better way to hold a thing after he dropped it once." Closed his eyes and put his mouth on her palm. "I love you," he said, "because some truths should be told like a clock striking. Me too." She said they planted an aspen near the porch, its leaves the sound of small coins in a pocket when the wind touched them. They named it Second Chance. Hayes rolled her eyes and watered it twice a week. Clay carved a small C into the porch rail the day he decided he was done running from himself. "So I have to answer to it when I walk by," he said. On a summer night, 2 years later, the sky burned orange over the red bluff, and a storm turned east and left rain on somebody else's wheat. Children ran lightning quick across the yard, Jox's youngest yelling like a rooster. Benny tuned a guitar he had traded for at the fair. Hayes baked something with peaches in it, and when people asked what the recipe was, she said, "Fruit, sugar, prayer," and play cards with the top ones visible. Elias stood on the porch, arm around Kit, shoulder to shoulder, same as the day they had stood and not died. He looked at the endless western sky, and he did not try to make it answer him anymore. He listened. It said what it has always said. "I am big. You are under me. You're small and loved and temporary and needed. Be as good as you know how. This place makes it easy to be humble," he said. Kit leaned her head on his shoulder. "This place makes it easy to be myself." She said, "That's different and the same." Benny started singing. Others joined. Clay's voice had gotten rougher and better. Jox tried harmony and hit it and missed it in turns and laughed. When they finally went inside, the lamp on the table burned with a little dance in it, the way flame does when it has come through a long day. Hayes set a slice of the peach thing in front of Elias and one in front of Kit, and gave Clay 2, just to remind him she could, and she stood with her hands on her hips and said, "Eat," which meant I am happy in a way I didn't expect to be again. Elias took a bite. It tasted like sun and sugar and the patience of the woman who made it, which is to say, it tasted like home. Years later, when people told their version of this story, they made both more and less of it. They liked the part where the rancher turned around on the cottonwood bank and held out a coat without looking. They quoted his rough question with a laugh. and they shushed themselves with the memory of how dare turned into tenderness in a breath. They told about Lamont, and the court, and the gun, and the judge, who liked truth better than he liked the sound of rich men talking. They told about the wedding on the porch, with Hayes's biscuit Bible, and the telegraph lady's fierce bun, and the deputy's red ears. They told it in kitchens and on porches and in bunkhouses and under stars. It became a way to say to a child, here's how to stand when someone tries to make you small. Here's how to say I'm sorry and mean it. Here's how to love a thing that has been shamed and not add more shame. Here's how you keep a house honest when the world outside it won't be. On the night Elias and Kit grew old without knowing the day it had happened, they sat on their steps with their shoulders touching, same as always. The aspen whispered. The red willow sang. In the distance, the sky went dark the way it does when it has made something beautiful and is tired and wants to rest. Tell me again, Kit said, eyes on the horizon. What? Elias asked, though he knew, and had known since the first time she asked, and would know until his bones were dust under a cottonwood that you love me, she said. He said it. The night took it in and held it and made room for one more long true thing under the endless western sky. And if the wind answered by turning, the leaves of second chance and a small bright cheer, well, no one thought that was a strange thing at all.